Hello everyone, welcome to the very first video in a series on the International A-Level History topic, Russia and Revolution. This will also be useful for any GCSE student studying anything to do with communism, the USSR, the Cold War. In this video, before we cover any content at all, I think it's really helpful to cover Marxism as an idea, as well as its application to Russia, Leninism. As you can see from the two memes on the page, one of the big things with Marxism is just how ridiculously confusing it is. Marx's ideas were an attempt at what's called a theory of everything. So he talked about basically everything. This has led people to devote their lives to trying to understand what the hell he meant. And as you'll see with Lenin, argue for their entire lives who has correctly interpreted Marx's original ideas. So the real question to begin is, why did Marx only drink coffee? Because proper tea is theft. No, sorry, the real question is, what were Marx's ideas and why were they so influential? Let's go to the next slide and find out. So hopefully this will all make sense soon. Now, I want this to be a really quick explanation of what all these keywords mean. So Marxism, as we'll refer to today, is just the ideology of Karl Marx. Capitalism, which he talks about quite a lot, is a system where individuals own property and businesses and they're free to make money. Under capitalism, there is inequality, but there is freedom. People are free to do really well, people are free to do really badly. Socialism, on the other hand, is a system where the government owns a lot of property and businesses. Under socialism, there is less inequality because there's a social safety net, but there is also less freedom. Most countries today combine a bit of capitalism and socialism. In the UK, for example, people are free to make money and own property, but the government owns some services like healthcare. Communism, though, is the end goal for Karl Marx. This is a system where no one owns property and businesses because everyone owns it. No one owns anything because everyone owns everything. In this system, there is no inequality and somehow there is total freedom. The way I always think about it is capitalism means I own it, socialism means we own it, and communism means no one owns it. Maybe a better way of explaining this is by looking at Troy Bolton. This could be the start of something new, and we're all in this together. Just like the High School Musical songs. In communism, we are all in this together, and hopefully it's the start of something new. Now, Karl Marx himself. Karl Marx was a German philosopher, born in 1818, and it's key for you to know that he lived through the Industrial Revolution, or at least the absolute peak of it. He lived in Germany, Belgium, Paris, crucially, because he saw the Paris Commune, and London. He saw capitalism running out of control. If you imagine, it's monopoly men, it's monocles, it's evil, large, fat cats who are becoming stupidly wealthy at the expense of their workers. This is the world in which Karl Marx lives, and this is what he sees with his own eyes. In 1848, he writes a book called The Communist Manifesto. It's not even really a book, it's a pamphlet. Probably worth reading. And then in 1867, he writes Das Kapital, which no one on the face of the planet has read. If anyone tells you they have read Das Kapital, you should probably not believe them. It is 50,000 pages on the history of money. But the Communist Manifesto, only 50 or so pages, definitely worth reading if you're interested. His core idea, because he was a historian, a philosopher, he was lots of different things, was that history progresses through class struggle. There is always the oppressed and there are always the oppressors, and history is moved when there is conflict between these two classes. He didn't view history as just like the events of stuff that happened. He viewed it as a science. And what is key about that idea? Science is measurable and predictable. Marx believed that history was measurable and predictable. So for him, history would progress through these stages, feudalism to capitalism to socialism to communism, and his evidence was that society and history had previously progressed through class conflict, so class conflict would obviously progress history in the future. For example, we moved from feudalism to capitalism when the bourgeoisie the town dwellers, the businessmen, took power from the landlords. Landlords used to oppress serfs in feudalism. Now, because of class conflict, we are in capitalism, where the bourgeoisie, the middle class, the factory owners, oppress the proletariat, and the proletariat are the working class. So Marx said, because this has happened in the past, well, it's obvious that class struggle is going to happen again, and then we'll have socialism, and then class struggle will happen again, and then we'll have communism. Wow. It's almost like I made this PowerPoint and I knew what I was going to say before it was actually there. So according to Marx's ideas, and this is really essential, he believed that we will eventually have communism, a stateless, which means no government, classless society. The key quote is, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Everyone will contribute what they can, and everyone will take what they need. For example, in a communist society, I would contribute what I have, which is historical knowledge, jokes, swag, aura, and I would take everything I need, which is lots of food and money. But in all seriousness, Marx believed that we will eventually have communism because the oppressed classes will overthrow the oppressors, because that is what has always happened. Here's a little diagram which shows Marx's idea of scientific history. At the start, there were no classes, there were just people living together. Then it was slavery, slavery became feudalism, feudalism became capitalism. Marx existed at the point where capitalism was a thing, and he believed that we were going to see the proletariat take over from the bourgeoisie, and then eventually we will have communism. The simplest explanation possible of all these very complicated ideas, which again, if you're doing this for A-level, you do need to know this. If you're only a GCSE student, a vague idea of what Marxism is will suit you well in your exam. Marx's ideas are Marxism. He believed that history progressed through class struggles and that eventually we would have communism. He is writing in 19th century Europe, like the meme says there. Imagine the smoky factories, Oliver Twist, Charles Dickens, kids are getting their fingers cut off in tiny machines. He is seeing this with his own eyes, and he is thinking to himself, it can't go on like this. The workers won't put up with this forever. Spoiler, they do. Wow. And according to Marx, it was a matter of when the workers were going to take over, not if they were going to take over. And then Marx he dies, and followers of Marx begin to call themselves Marxists, communists, and they've begun to sort of question how we can get to the land of milk and honey, how we can get to this communist society that Marx told us was going to happen. Now let's get to Russia, because that's what we're covering today, the Russia in Revolution A-level topic, and the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, which, incredibly ironically, used to meet up in a pub in Islington, which is Jeremy Corbyn's constituency now. Now this was created in 1898. It's crucial to know Marx has been dead for 15 years at this point. They can't ask Marx what he would have thought about Russia, but their mission is to bring this communist society to the Russian Empire. They're debating very heavily amongst themselves, and the main sticking point they've got is that Russia is not even close to an industrial society. It's barely a capitalist society. Marx said that this can only happen in an industrial society, and we're not one. So what do we do? In 1903, at the party congress, there is an official split within the party between the Mensheviks, which means minority, and ironically, they wanted a big party. So the Mensheviks are led by a fellow called Martov. He believes that they should follow almost exactly what Marx said. The Communist Party should be big, it should work with trade unions, there should be a gradual revolution in which socialism will happen after capitalism. Martov thinks that socialism probably won't come to Russia for 100 years because it's not even capitalist yet, and that their job in the present should just be to educate the workers, advocate for better working conditions, and then eventually, like Marx said, we'll have communism. But Lenin comes along, and Lenin's group is called the Bolsheviks. Bolsheviks means majority. The majority were actually the minority, and the minority were the majority. Lenin comes up with quite an interesting idea. He says that we don't need to actually follow the steps that Marx said if we have a vanguard. And a vanguard is a small group of professional revolutionaries who can speed up the process of Marxism through violent revolution. Unfortunately, I can't embed a video within a video, but this is just from High School Musical, Gotta Go My Own Way. This is how I imagine Lenin broke up with Martov at the 1903 Party Congress. Now, the reason I've put this here is because the way to think about Leninism is either a completely different idea or it is just an application of Marxism to Russia. So when Taylor Swift re-releases her albums and calls them something, Taylor's version, she is arguing that it's the same album she initially wrote, just in an updated way. The record label sees it slightly differently and says it's a completely different thing. Lenin argues that all he's done is apply Marxism to a Russian context, whereas his opponents will say, no, you've come up with a completely new idea. So Marxism was a product of industrialized Russia. Sorry, first mistake. Marxism was a product of industrialized Europe. He would have never ever even considered the idea that there would be a revolution in Russia. And the big problem for Lenin is that Russia is a feudal society. It's not even capitalist yet, so it can't be socialist, let alone communist. But Lenin's solution, Lenin's version, is an elite group of intellectuals will lead the revolution on behalf of the workers. His idea is that the Russian workers are too uneducated, too badly organized, they don't have what's called class consciousness, so we can't wait for them to do the revolution. We can't wait. We will take the revolution and then we will give the workers power when they are ready. So the vanguard will take power, introduce socialism, give power to the workers, and then eventually communism will happen. Lenin's ideas are extremely fringe and unpopular. Hopefully you can see why. The Mensheviks are trying to apply orthodox Marxism. Lenin is interpreting it in a very interesting way and saying, no, the worker revolution cannot be led by the workers, it will be led by the intellectuals on behalf of the workers. And some time to think now. Here's some questions I'm going to leave you with for you to discuss with your teacher, for you to think about by yourself. Was Lenin right that a small vanguard was necessary for a revolution in Russia? Is Leninism a necessary adaptation of Marxism for a Russian context, or is it a clear misinterpretation? And then finally, is the idea of a vanguard taking complete power and then willingly giving it away realistic or unrealistic? I will leave you with one final joke. Why does Marx never keep a punchline to himself? Because he loves sharing comedy. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something.